Let's now shift our attention to what is happening in Myanmar, where protests show no signs of letting up despite internet shutdowns and police crackdowns. Protests continue in full force against the military coup, which, remember, abruptly brought to an end the country's brief tryst with democracy on the 1st of February. Satellite images have now been put out by the Maxar technology group that shows to how widespread is the defiance against the military in Myanmar. And these protests, this is the scale of the protests, and it is quite literally visible from space. If one were to zoom in and look at the number of people who are there on the streets of Myanmar. Now, the most powerful image, of course, is perhaps of the slogan which states, "We want democracy," that was written on the main road in Mandalay, the second largest city in Myanmar. Now, opponents of Myanmar's military have called for more big protests on Wednesday. The coup that cut short Myanmar's unsteady transition towards democracy has prompted daily demonstrations since the 6th of February onwards, some drawing hundreds and in some cases even thousands of people. In Yangon, the largest city in Myanmar, drivers parked their vehicles in the middle of a major crossway in order to block the deployment of armoured military vehicles, responding to a broken-down car campaign spreading on social media. Commuters, taxi drivers and even public transportation employees have joined the protest. Meanwhile, Myanmar's military, in its first press conference since it seized power, guaranteed that it will hold an election and also hand over power, has also denied that it carried out a military coup. Listen it. Now, the army's justification of its 1st of February seizure of power has come in as protests show no signs of letting up, and after a United Nations envoy warned the army of severe consequences for any harsh response to the demonstrations. The military has not given a date for the new election, but it has imposed a state of emergency for about 1 year. Now, despite the army's assurances, the police have now filed a new charge against Aung San Suu Kyi for allegedly violating the COVID-19 restrictions. While the maximum punishment for COVID-19 violations is 3 years of imprisonment, this may actually allow for the military junta in Myanmar to potentially detain Aung San Suu Kyi indefinitely without a trial. The Suu Kyi's lawyer has said that she was produced in court earlier in the day ahead of schedule and without any representation. He also said that he has not been allowed to see Aung San Suu Kyi since she was detained, and that the court is yet to recognize him as her attorney. The United States reacted to the additional charges and has called for the immediate release of the political leader.
You mentioned the additional charges against Aung San Suu Kyi. I think it's fair to say that we are disturbed by reports that the military has charged State Counsel Aung San Suu Kyi with additional criminal acts. As we have before, we call on the Burmese military to immediately release all unjustly detained civilian and political leaders, journalists, and human rights activists and other members of civil society, as well as to restore the democratically elected government.
The Aung San Suu Kyi, who was ousted in the coup on the 1st of February, has already been charged with possessing walkie-talkies that were imported without being registered. So this, of course, is what is playing out right now in Myanmar, where the protests are, of course, continuing to pick up steam. And now the military junta, which carried out the coup on the 1st of February and deposed the civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, they have now filed another charge against her of violating the COVID-19 restrictions, something which potentially could allow the military junta to keep Aung San Suu Kyi under detention indefinitely without a trial. Now, the military, of course, claims that what they've carried out in Myanmar is not a coup. It has also asked the people who are out on the streets protesting against the military coup to return to their homes and to trust in the process that the military is now dictating to the nation. And also to give us more insights in terms of what's actually playing out in Myanmar, we are joined in by journalist Min Tant, who's joining us from Yangon. Ms. Min Tant, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this broadcast on WION. So bring us up to speed with what is happening presently in Myanmar.
Sure. So today there has been a call from activists and CDM leaders for a show of force and for the people to protest in even larger groups than they had been in the past. And so what we've seen today is a number of essentially car-based protests where people are blocking roads, bridges, including on the border with China, where trade has essentially slowed to a stop. And in Yangon, as well as other places around the country, there has been an increased number of people out on the streets protesting.
Right. Now, what is interesting is also the fact that the military junta that has taken charge of the nation has now filed another charge against Aung San Suu Kyi. She's now been charged for violating COVID-19 guidelines. Is there any specific instance that the military is claiming where she's violated the COVID-19 guidelines? Why has this charge been brought up against her?
As of right now, that's not very clear. The military said that they decided to do what they currently have done, which they're not calling a coup, because of election fraud. But what we've seen in the two charges against Aung San Suu Kyi is that neither of them have anything to do with election fraud specifically, although the COVID-19 charge is related to the campaign activities that she engaged in. However, the trials are not public, and Aung San Suu Kyi's the lawyers that have been retained for Aung San Suu Kyi via her party have not been able to attend her video meetings with the judge.
And also pretty much everywhere when governments try to crush protests, one of the first things that they do is they shut down the internet. We've heard that Myanmar also is experiencing an internet shutdown. Give us a sense of how widespread that is.
Yes, so we've been going through essentially countrywide shutdowns from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. Every night for the last 3 nights. Before this, in Rakhine State and parts of Chin State, especially where there's been a lot of essentially civil war and ethnic conflict, that area had been under the internet shutdown for the longest time in sort of world history. And now the rest of the country is now experiencing this. Of course, there's small pockets of internet. Certain really high cost hotels still have internet, although it is slowed. Some of the border regions we've heard also have internet, and some foreign SIM cards will work here if you're on roaming.
All right. Now, also give us an idea of how widespread these protests are, because on the 1st of February, when the military junta in Myanmar carried out the coup, the protests started off pretty slow and then later on picked up steam after about a week. So how widespread are the protests presently?
Yes, the protests are essentially countrywide, and I think in the international press, we're not seeing quite as much of that. And it's in part because a lot of journalists and especially international outlets are based in Yangon. That's also complicated by the fact that both because of COVID travel restrictions, but also the now, very robust civil disobedience movement, it's very hard for journalists to move across the country. And we're very much reliant on local, essentially citizen journalists to fill in that information. And that doesn't doesn't quite sort of breach into international news quite as often. And the reason for the protest kind of taking a couple days before it really became sort of the widespread, large in the street things that we're seeing today is because in the first 72 hours, Aung San Suu Kyi hadn't been charged yet. And a lot of people were concerned that whatever actions that they took, especially in the streets, would be retroactively used against her in any sort of charges or court cases.
All right, now there's a lot of speculation as to why the military junta actually went about and carried out this military coup. But, you know, the man at the center of all this, General Min Aung Hlaing, has he at all made any public statement after the coup as to why he did it?
Yes, so he's had two addresses to the nation on state television, and there's also been a press conference that was held yesterday that a number of media actually boycotted, although it did still get covered. Essentially, what the military and Min Aung Hlaing has been saying is that what they did was for the safety of the nation, to safeguard democracy, and to ensure that the will of the people was being followed, which is quite ironic considering how large the opposition to the military takeover has been.
All right, now the military there claims that it is to safeguard the will of the people. My last question to you is, after the coup, is there a timeline at all that has been given by the military in Myanmar as to when they would like to again carry out a transition of power to a civilian government? Will elections be held? And if so, will they be held under the present constitutional criteria, or does the military want to bring about some changes to the Myanmarese constitution?
So since the beginning of the coup, the military did state that there would be elections in a year. They essentially declared, I think on the third day, that we were in a state of emergency and that within a year, a new election commission would be created and new elections would be held under that election commission, and that, you know, whichever party or whoever won the election would take power after that. And that has been repeated multiple times in communications from the military. In terms of the Constitution, there's not much of a, you know, it's difficult to tell, but from all of the sort of language from the military so far, they've been talking a lot about protecting the 2008 Constitution. So at the very least, they're not posturing in a way that indicates that they want to create a brand new constitution.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Amen Tan, for joining us from Yangon and getting us all those updates there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.